Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special side. I don't know how to even get into this, guys.
Bonus. It's a bonus.
It's a bonus episode. Between episodes, look behind the screen.
Yeah.
Yes.
I reached
behind the movie trap.
Yeah, I reached out to a friend of mine. It's a guy who had been on Harmontown, as well as a number of other things. His name is Tim Talbott. I realized that we're recording this after we did the interview. Tim Talbott was nice enough to be on, but as we do most things, we just figured it out on the fly, and I realized we didn't introduce him to us or introduce him to himself. So, Tim Talbott is one of the people who's written on many things. He has a for real IMDb page, as opposed to just a list of student films he was involved in, and which would be most of mine.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. So,
likewise,
we sat him down and we talked to him about the Stanford prison experiment for about an hour. So it was a really nice aside, and I guess without further ado, we're gonna jump right into it. So, some of the basic things. You worked on this for a significantly long time. Like this script was around for a while. I remember you started it in like 2002 or 2004, right?
I was hired. I was brought into basically they pitched the project in 2000. Basically, they wanted to hire Chris McQuarrie to write it, but they couldn't afford him. And he happened to be friends with me, and said, "Hey, if I want to take a chance on Tim, I'll come on to produce or whatever." And it messes it up. Can we curse on this?
Oh yeah, you can curse all you want. Yeah.
Okay. So if he fucks it up, I'll clean it up. And so that started in 2002. They didn't actually commence me until 2003, and I didn't start writing it until 2004. And probably researched it for a good 7 months before I started writing, and then it took another 6 months to write.
Okay, because I was going to ask how you decided on this particular experiment.
Well, I can tell you what happened was basically I had friends who were working at Maverick Films, and they had the rights to Doctors in Bar, and they picked us this idea, and my initial reaction was, I don't believe. Like, I don't believe you can take me and put me in a classroom for a couple of days and believe that it's a real prison that I can't get out of. So I did the research, the basic research, and watched Zimbardo's little documentary that he done, and was just fascinated by it. And so I thought, they had a couple of other.
Was that Blind Rage? Was that one?
Yeah, I think
Quiet Rage.
Quiet Rage. Yeah. And they tried to make a movie out of this for a long time, but they kept fictionalizing. They kept trying to make it into something that it wasn't, whereas there's a guard and a prisoner and they're both best friends, a girl on the outside, and I just, after reading it, it was like this itself fascinating enough that we should stick to as close to it as we can.
Yeah, it was funny because when I was doing this, we had to be very clear about, it's the Stanford prison experiment, not the experiment with, whoever, it was like Forrest Whitaker and Brody and a bunch of other people. And yeah, this one's a lot more fun. That one looked like the other one looked like it was probably a rough time.
Yeah, and again, it was heavily fictionalized. It was based on a different film that was heavily fictionalized based on, I think Zimbardo might still be doing them.
Really? Doing?
Yeah, I mean, because they basically appropriated it and turned it into something where it was all people are murdered in this video.
Huh.
So.
Well, yeah. I mean, and I'm actually, because you said you spent about 7 months researching it. Talk about that, because it seems like, according to the way you watched the movie, you did seem to do a pretty deep dive into that. So if you could, as best you can, what was that process like of researching something like this?
Well, first of all, one of the things that was done at the same time was that Zimbardo was preparing to write his own book about this. So he sharing his originals with me, and including like logs of every day. They had to fill out paperwork every day. All the guards did, and then they were constantly, the same questionnaire to the prisoners every day to see how it changed over time. On top of that, there was about 24 hours of videotape of the actual experiment that I had to go through and transcribe. So a lot of the big moments in this are almost verbatim from what really happened. And as I was writing the script, he was writing the book. And at one point, I think there was maybe like a millisecond where I knew more of this than Zimbardo did, because I just got all of his stuff. And he was sending me chapters of his book, and I was having to correct him and go, I think you got, this was 4, 5, 7, 7, 8, not no 3, 6, 2, 4.
Yeah, we were trying to figure out how you'd kept track of everybody, because there were so many different numbers and names, and it just seemed like you probably had to have a whole spreadsheet set up to just figure out who was who.
The thing that was really stupid and ambitious on my part was, in the very first draft, started off with the characters' names, so it would be like Doug Corpy. And he became Doug Corpy 8612, and then by the end of the script is 86112. And trying to juggle, 9 of these guys was impossible at the end.
Totally,
so,
absolutely.
And then top it all off, just one little thing. When the movie was actually made, they changed all the real names anyway. So all the names that are listed in the cast, like, I don't even know who the characters are. I only know the numbers.
Yeah, I was curious about that, because I tried looking up some of them, and I realized that like I had to go to the documentary to figure out who like the tough guard was, because there's a guy named David Eshelman, and he didn't appear in like the IMDb. And then I was like, what happens to these people later in life? And like that guy turned into a
real estate agent, I think.
Yeah, it's really weird, because you're like, he seemed really intense. Anyway, I'll let you guys kind of ask some more questions here.
Well, I've taught, I'm glad that Borf brought up the whole being a number, because like part of this whole story is the dehumanization of people. So as you're writing this and you're just pretty much referring to them as numbers, how much of a struggle was that for you as a writer to humanize these people when you're just looking at them as numbers, or John Wayne, the pseudonyms that they give themselves?
Well, the thing that was kind of that was my mandate in writing the script was to just write everything that during those 6 days. So in doing so, my first script was 200 and something pages long.
Wow.
Right. So like a single thing of note that happened during those 6 days, I somehow dramatized. And so I handed this to Chris McQuarrie and said, I think they're going to fight me, but here's what happened.
And here's a door saw.
Here you go. And he came back, a couple of days later and said, this is a movie we're gonna make. We can't hand this to anyone, and I think I can see where we can cut some pages out. And I'm like, if you cut any of this tail out, it's not going to work. And over the course of this 2 weeks, myself, his assistant, Nathan Alexander, who went on to write Valkyrie with him, through the script, and got down to 128 pages. And the cool thing about it was, in doing that, it only strengthened the characters as individuals, because it set up this kind of like unique structure where you're following Doug Corpy 8612 through the beginning of the movie until he has his breakdown, and then he's the lead character, and then he's gone. And then it's like, then there's this next 819, and you're following him. You think he's the lead character, and he's gone, and you just realize that by the end of this, the experiment is the lead character.
Right.
And you're just fearful for these kids, and are they going to survive this,
Yeah, we kind of picked up on that, because it was such an interesting structure, because it really like kept you guessing as to who you should emote for. And then at the end, you're like, oh, well, I should emote for who was the most empathetic character? I was like, oh, well, it's the guy who went through the full arc of realizing he had put these like young boys in this dangerous situation and hadn't considered them.
Right. And for me, the biggest moment of the movie and the script was, I'm not going to remember his number now, but the one guy who's basically a flower the entire time, does everything he's told to do,
sure.
And then they break him by getting him to swear. It's like this tiny little moment that just means the complete world for him. And once that happened, it's like, all bets are off.
Yeah, and I pointed this out when we watched it, and he was the most obedient. He was the most compliant.
Yeah.
I find
they hated him for it.
Right.
They hated him.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was he I'm trying to keep it straight. He was the guy who, when he was leaving, they said 819 did a bad thing. Is that the...
No.
No, that was the guy who was the fake parole board or whatever.
The guy that they made do the push-ups with the two people on his back.
Okay, yeah.
They basically got him to say the word bastard, and he was a very religious kid.
Yeah, he had the really interesting moment where you kind of humanize the guard for a second, because the cool hand Luke guard is always so intense, but when they got onto the part where they found out the kid is legitimately homeless, it sort of just stopped them all for a second. And it was kind of interesting to see that as a moment. Was that in scenes like that? How much of this was sort of like finding the moments in the footage to use, and how much of this was like a dramatization?
I think it's a combination of both. Probably 50-50 of both. Again, when you're 24 hours worth of stuff, there's a lot of dead air.
Yeah,
But the moments that kind of scream out at you are the ones that you want to dramatize. And luckily, and for me, a lot of it was just very much transcribing that stuff and just trying to make dramatize it a little bit. Overall, I'd say the movie is probably 85% accurate. Some of the stuff had to be changed for dramatic reasons, purely towards the end. I overall think that the changes we made in the end made the film stronger, and I'm happy with it.
That's a good point. I mean, I never thought of like addition by subtraction. We always see it's a disinstinctive thing to do especially I think as a writer. But it is kind of true that when you kind of trim down all of the stuff and then condense it into 120 some odd pages, it is easier for you to kind of follow and make these numbers human, and thereby realizing that like, oh, it's not really the experiments, it's the experiment itself. It's Zimbardo, I think really Zimbardo, and I'm curious about him too, because it sounds like you worked really, I want to say concurrently, but almost to that point. What was it like dealing with somebody who's still alive and you're dealing with this person's kind of life's work?
Very, very weird.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It was very, very weird because, he's been not dining out on this 45, 50 years. But, I mean, this is the thing he's been known for. And, I came into it in the beginning thinking that this the result was expecting. And the fact of the matter is he wasn't expecting this. He'd done tons of experiments like this, and the only thing that was different was that it was going to go on for 2 weeks. And he didn't expect this to be the premier sort of experiment. And after I wrote the first draft, we actually went up and sat with Zimbardo and his wife together and separately and interviewed them about what was going on. And that was a lot more flavor in the later drafts. And she really very, very, even though it's a very small role in the movie, she's very important in how the thing resolves. And I thought Olivia did a great job.
For sure. It's crucial.
Yeah, Zach, I think you had a question about Zimbardo you wanted to ask. Or like how...
I actually was curious. I imagine that obviously a great deal of the stuff involving the actual scenes inside the prison are based on real reference footage and things you have firsthand accounts of. But I have to assume a lot of what happened between the people conducting the experiment was not as heavily recorded. And so I think I imagine, and you correct me if I'm wrong, you had more control over the portrayal of Zimbardo than you did over the guards and the prisoners in some ways, because you got to write his words. Was he protective of how he was portrayed? Because sometimes he comes off very cold.
No, he was actually, again, one of the hardest things I had to do was go sit with him and watch this movie for the first time and wonder whether or not I had kind of, failed his life work. And he very much stands by the portrayal of him in this movie. And again, you do a good point. A lot of the stuff dealing with the experimenters was not recorded, other than daily notes, stuff like that. But even you're able to pull some of the fast stuff out from the recordings of even the parole hearings and stuff. Mm-hmm. With Carlo, which I guess they've changed his name too. I don't know what the names are, but a lot of that stuff was almost verbatim too. Only actual reality went on longer.
Huh. That's interesting. I admire the man a lot more, because it did not seem like you guys really treated him with kid gloves at all, and it's remarkable that he appreciated that. I find that's amazing, because he does make this turn, and he does realize eventually that we've crossed a line. And
but that's one of the big differences between reality and the movie is the way that happened was completely different. Okay. In the original draft, basically, he had his fight with Stina and would drive around at night just thinking, lost in thought. And he came back in the morning and it's a tape of the night before, and it just had a little note on it that said press play. and he put it and watched that last night of horror unfold, and that is what Bay said. We got to end this.
Wow.
Okay, I can understand that you had to kind of add the ticking clock to it, so it was a moment where he had to stand up and make a real choice.
And to Billy Crudup's credit, the him walking in and ending that whole thing was first day.
Whoa! Really? Wow! Holy shit!
Yep.
That's I've heard stories about him as doing things like that. Like when he did Bringing Out the Dead, it was him in the Jennifer Connelly movie. I think there's a moment in that where he has a really intense emotional moment where he's dealing with her death and he's crying, and it's a really intense moment. It was like the first thing he shot in the movie, and then he went on to do the rest. I am always amazed when people can just turn it on like that. It's just
and also, I mean, to be able to walk into a where the other actors had all been together and acting close quarters for a week and a half at that point, because the schedule was only like 18 or 9 days.
Impressive.
And, again, the fact that they pulled it off.
Impressive.
My mind.
Awesome.
But to be able to walk into a room of bonded people and kind of just show up in a performance like that was pretty impressive.
Have you stayed in touch with anybody from the study or from the film since then?
I mean, I still have occasional contact with Zimbardo, just like hey, how's it going? That kind of a thing. But and Kyle Alvarez, the director, I'm still friendly with him. We're face buddies and Instagram friends. But for the most part, everybody's so it was overwhelming because the first day I went onto the set, there's 20 kids there that I've never seen before, and like I keep track of them, Yeah,
it was an impressive ensemble cast. I was kind of surprised that they managed to get that sense of sort of camaraderie with some of the kids that had been involved in it.
What's interesting is a lot of those kids had worked together before, starting back when they were like 9 or 10 years working in commercials. And my biggest fear was you're gonna 10 young actors and the egos that go along, and it's just gonna be a nightmare. But it was like one of the calmest set I've ever been on. Everybody was really cool. There was like this tension in the air, and when the camera would cut, everybody would goof around just to kind of break the tension.
That's good. I mean, because it's a relentless movie. You know, like that was the word we use. So like you've got to have those moments of levity on set where like everyone can breathe a little bit and remember that we're telling a story, and it just kind of relax a little bit. I know you've been very generous with your time, but I did want to get into the idea of just actual screenwriting in general. So like talk about you getting into writing, like what kind of brought you into the craft?
Well, nothing I ever wanted to do. I went to film
Fair
school.
enough.
Like everyone else, went to film school thinking I was going to be a director. By the time I got to film school, I figured that the last thing I wanted to do was director. I wanted to be an editor. At every other stage, like writing it, you have some control, but you can't. Once you film it, you can't keep having your head onto film. And then finally, in the end stage, you have a pile of things that you have to make work. And so I always thought I was going to be an editor. And I moved to California and just couldn't get my foot in the door in editing. And this is in the early 90s. And the whole spec screenplay boom going on then. And the only thing I felt to do without someone hiring me was to try and write a screenplay. So I wrote a script with a friend of mine based on a film we had done in college and got an A off the first script. Almost sold twice, and then ended up dabbling around film production for a while and finally got sick of that and said, I'm going to try for full time. And luckily I met a kid who was a trust fund kid from New Jersey who inadvertently led me to actually for prison experiments. He ended up becoming an executive at Maverick, but he funded the writing of like the first scripts of mine. So I got to learn while being paid to do it. And then ended up on South Park. Knows how, and some feature work, and then after the writer's strike of 2007, I basically ended up going to television, and have been doing that mostly.
When you brought up South Park, it reminds me. I think when you were on Harmontown, you talked about one of the episodes that you had the most creative sort of impact on, and I believe it was an episode of with Cartman, where he was...
Most of those episodes have Cartman Borough.
Well, yeah, I know, but it was specifically it was the episode where he
The
feeds...
Scott Tenorman Must Die
There you go.
episode?
No, that one was actually like 2 episodes before I started.
Oh, okay.
But I did do. There was one. My favorite in particular is we did the one where Jared AIDS. Where that came out of just it is one of the funniest days of my life. We were just sitting around talking about how Subway. I had worked at a Subway which as a manager, and I got into an argument with Matt Stone about how we eat fresh food. It wasn't all crap food, and he's like, "That's garbage food. No way you could lose weight eating that." It's like, well, how else does he got to do it? And it's like, and I said, well, what if he's got AIDS? And one of our other writers, this guy named Vernon Chapman, said, "No, what if he'd have AIDS? These two guys named Doug and Barry, follow him around and make sure that it." And so the next 5 minutes were us pounding every dumb AIDS joke into the ground. And it ended up being pretty good. The only other one I can claim, and it again came out of it with Matt Stone, which was about the special editions of the Star Wars movies and all that stuff.
Yeah, okay.
I recall that one, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's an episode
replacing the guns with radios and that sort of thing.
And so the whole idea is they heard they were change Raiders of the Lost Ark, so the boy break into Skywalker Ranch to get the prince back. And apparently Spielberg, the reaction to it was so big that Spielberg sent Matt a letter saying, "I don't know whether to be flattered or scared of you guys." We heard through the grapevine that they were going to change. They would make major just to Raiders of the Lost Ark, and they didn't do it because of that episode. So I feel pretty good about that.
Okay, alrighty. Well, the fact that you even get Spielberg's ear a little bit, even if you get him even quasi quivering in his boots, is worth. They can't pay you for that. Yeah, they can't pay you for that. Well, and talk about that too, because I know you write a lot of like hour-long and then half-hour-long sitcoms. What's the difference in mindset in writing for the different sort of medium, so to speak?
That's the one thing. Since I didn't get into this career to be, I want to be a writer. I kind of fell into it. I didn't have any specific type movie I wanted to write a TV show. I'm a fan of all kinds of genres, so sort of the detriment of my career, tried to do stuff in every genre. I've written horror movies. I've written historical drama.
Balls Out, which is hilarious comedy.
Yeah, so the mindset is just like, where's the job come and what's required of me, but most have been doing hour-longs and they're just it's a format you figure out.
Right.
You're going to have a 45 script and it's going to have fact breaks. And if it's network, it's going to have, very, very specific fact breaks that lead to the next thing. If it's not network, not necessarily, it's all, you sort of learn lie. But after doing it for 10 years, it becomes sort of like second hat. Not second hat.
It just
Second
comes
nature.
in
Second nature. Old hat.
Yeah, I like old hat though. That sounds better to me.
Old hat.
I actually, since you brought that up, there's a question they asked me, and because my background's in doing like live directing, I couldn't answer correctly. They were asking like how a director handles it or a writer handles it. In this case, it was with Blind Spotting because the two leads wrote it and they've been living with that story for like years. How is it handled when you go into a situation where the actors are really closely tied to something or they know something? And I said, well, it depends on the sort of work you're doing. And I guess in TV, you could probably speak more to it. Like as a writer, you have more of a creative control over the arc of the whole show in terms of like how it's handled, as opposed to like, I would assume Stanford Prison Experiment with Kyle Alvarez. You have a contrast there. Maybe you can talk about the difference between the experience as a writer in those circumstances.
The thing with Kyle was sort of unique because we very much were collaborative, and he, took my suggestions and my thoughts, and it was a very good relationship. And plus, we had very little time, so there was no time for fighting about stuff, and really there wasn't a whole lot to fight about. And as the dailies were coming in, I'm like, oh my God, this is, you're really recreating this thing. I blowing me away. And TV, generally, because you're dealing with multi hours of television, the writers or the showrunner is king. And when I produce episodes of TV that I've written on set, the directors who are hired per episode, right? I mean, you get hired one episode and then you go away. They have to defer to the writer. So do the actors for the most part. So if there's someone who has a question about the intent of something, and the direct one interpretation, and I have another, usually mine wins, unless it's a blow up. So you're there just to basically make sure that getting it, the tone of it, and that you're not, going off the rails in terms of the way that the show overall is supposed to be in that particular season. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Totally.
I was going to ask, you mentioned earlier that your original draft was quite a bit longer. It was something like 200 pages. I was
30, something like that.
30. Yeah, I was curious, especially because, in particular, the application interviews and the exit interviews are pretty short in this film. Is there anything from any of your reading that you really wish you could have included that ultimately ended up on the floor, like
tons of stuff. Tons of stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's all sorts of little machinations that Zimbardo was juggling the whole experiment, but to make sure the parents didn't to make sure that the priest didn't revolt, to make sure that the lawyer didn't revolt. All these little things. At one point, they broke down the entire prison because he expected someone was coming to break the out. Which exists in a little scene in there. There are things that, like, what the guards did to terrorize them. Like at one point, they go out and take their blankets and drag them through thistle. And then they would have to sit there for hours just pulling stickers out of their blankets. You know what I mean? One of the scenes that they shot, but it just didn't end up working because it was on one of the first days, was leading these kids bathroom with bags over their heads and chains on their feet. How do you manage to go to the bathroom in front of guards? And the guards are like barking at you during the thing. And it had a couple of my favorite lines of dialogue in it. The exit interviews are based on Zimbardo's Quiet Storm documentary, because it's literally again, most of it was transcribed, and to be honest, my script ended where he said, "I would have been a guard. It would have been such a masterpiece," and right. I thought it would have been like a girl to cut it, and Kyle vetoed me on that one over and the little extra bit, but.
He did the bit where it was the two guys interacting at the end, so we could see Ezra Klein and his character kind of come back. That's the last scene in the film.
Right, and that's again is one of those ones not real, because it wasn't really Ezra Miller. Wasn't Miller. It wasn't his character.
Ezra Klein, Jesus Bora.
Talking to John Wayne. But they thought because they're the two leads of the movie, it should be the two of them. Which is, again, one of those movie director things.
Sure. Well, and it seemed like, you were really engrossed in the material, too. Did the director do the same kind of deep dive as you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because it seems like it. I mean, it seems like in the movie, like he was trying to go for angles that the CCTV didn't get. He was trying to get right up close, where you guys are seeing a bird's eye view.
His use of slow motion is fantastic in the movie. I think the score is really, really good. And again, getting and corralling actors to get those performances, I think, was really outstanding. And it wouldn't have happened if they didn't. And he's a really good director.
Yeah, and everybody really, I say this in the when we talk about it, that everybody really does pull their weight. Everyone really contributes to and gives all out, which is again, that's remarkable to corral such a ensemble like that, where the main character is kind of the doctor, but you don't really know it until really the end, to sort of keep everybody intriguing enough for the audience to sort of follow along with.
It's great. The guy that plays John Wayne, Michael Angarano, is probably 5'7".
I noticed he was short. Yeah,
he's the real guy was probably around 6 feet, but in the exit interviews, everyone described him as being 6'4", 6'5", because the power dynamic. Right. It seemed like he was that bigger than
wow.
them. I mean, it's really there's a lot of psychology that came out of this that we unfortunately weren't able to fit in there, but it's really fascinating.
Can I want to expand on something Russell just said and had mentioned before. It does seem like early in the movie, the protagonist almost switches from 8612 to, I forget
8199.
Yes, who has the breakdown, to finally the character who is forced to swear. And you ultimately realize Zimbardo is the main character. It seems like it mirrors this idea Zimbardo had that the experiment was about the prisoners, but at the end, it seems like you learned more about the guards and Zimbardo himself. Do you think that's how he feels about the experiment? And is that how you felt about the script when you were finding sort of the point of view characters, the through line, the character arcs?
Well, again, my sort of direct in starting the script was to write everything that happened in those 8 days and just to be kind of cynical about it, like almost like writing a documentary. And it wasn't until we went through and started paring down the script, these characters started to really appear. You know, all the details were always there. It was like, wow, that's a cool beat, and you know, wow, that's a really powerful moment. It wasn't until you really realized that, you know, you're really actively messing with the audience when you're like, Ezra Miller, our lead character in this, and then he's gone halfway through, you know, and then this other kid is the lead character, and then finally when you break 2 and 3, realize that I would say that Zimbardo was the main character. I would say that the experiment becomes the main character. This environment, this thing that's going on becomes the main character. And you're focusing on Zimbardo trying to figure out how to either maintain it, or ultimately when Christina confronts him, you know, the thing down and realize what he's done. Yeah, a lot of that'll come out in subgraphs where we were just trying to, figure out what the story was we were actually telling. I'm now noticing that all the light has gone out of my room. Sitting here in the dark.
I realized we also kept you going for like an hour, and we said it would be a half hour. Sorry about that.
Oh, it's no problem.
I've been more than grateful for the generosity of your time, sir. I am very happy.
Happy to do it.
No, a great movie. Very well done. Very well done. Very well done.
Yeah, thank you for doing this, Tim. This was very good. It's awesome. This has been something that has been like a bucket list item because I wanted to have somebody on, and you're like the first industry professional who's actually come on. So it was very exciting. Thanks for doing this.
Don't tell him that, Borup. Jesus.
Well, I mean, we're working on the podcast. It's sort of like a book club, but you know, it's nice that people came. It's nice. Thank you.
We'll lose this episode for a while and release it when we have more clout, so you're not embarrassed. Thank you so much for coming by.
Really do. Thank you, man. Very appreciative.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good to meet you. We'll let you know when it comes out.
Our pleasure.
And our pleasure. Thank you for everything, and I hope you're well, and I hope you stay safe in all the crazy stuff going on. All right, and that was the end of the interview. We managed to keep Tim on the call for an hour, and he answered all of our questions in detail, and hopefully that was educational for everybody else. I enjoyed being able to finally ask some of my questions that I had been wondering about the whole time that I'd never, up until now, been able to ask him.
I thought one of the best takeaways I took from it was that, you know, the rough draft was literally just a transcript. So it's almost like Michelangelo with a block of marble, right? That he just sort of from that block carved out David. So I was very impressed to hear about that process. I thought that was very cool. And the Billy Crudup story was amazing. That's a fascinating story. And he was, again, awesome to have him on because he was very, very kind with his time and very forthcoming about it all.
Yep. Extremely interesting to see a person who crafted a script while working deeply with one of the main subjects of that script, and how they relate to how they are portrayed in semi-fiction, or at least a fictionalized version of events. But yeah, if you were intrigued by either our discussion or that interview, seek out the Stanford Prison Experiment 2015 film. Well worth watching.